Emma Culligan just did what generations of treasure hunters, scholars, and experts couldn't. She pinpointed the exact spot where Oak Island's legendary $300 million treasure is actually buried. No more theories, no more speculation, no more chasing shadows in the swamp or drilling blind into the money pit. Emma's breakthrough isn't a guess. It's the first location backed by hard data, ancient geometry, and physical confirmation on the ground. In a single move, she's overturned 200 years of assumptions and exposed a hidden design that was right beneath everyone's feet. And the moment her coordinates locked into place, the entire mystery of Oak Island began to shift. Because if Emma is right, every indicator says she is, the real treasure vault isn't where anyone thought. It's somewhere far more deliberate, far more protected, and far more significant than any previous team ever imagined. Before we dive in, smash that like button and subscribe, because what you're about to hear might be the closest anyone has ever come to unlocking Oak Island's greatest secret. The morning Emma Culligan stepped back onto Oak Island, the entire place seemed to inhale. Not the gusty, restless winds the team had fought all season, but an eerie stillness, like the island was waiting for her. She moved with a quiet, sharpened purpose that even Rick Lagina noticed the second she stepped out of the truck. There was something in her eyes, some unspoken certainty, like she wasn't returning to search. She was returning to confirm something. Rick had seen experts, theorists, engineers, researchers, hundreds of people with ideas. But Emma wasn't walking like someone chasing a theory. She was walking like someone who already knew where the truth was buried. A thick dawn fog lay low over the swamp, rolling in slow, heavy sheets that muffled sound and gave the place an almost ancient weight. It clung to Emma's boots as she crossed toward the eye of the swamp, the mist curling around her like the island itself didn't want to reveal what she was about to show them. Rick followed a step behind, watching her study multiple decades of survey maps. Maps he'd stared at for half his life. Maps the entire Oak Island legacy was built on. Yet Emma scanned them like they were written in a language resurrected from the dead. She traced faint lines and ignored prominent ones. She lingered over shaded patches most researchers dismissed. And every time her finger locked onto a detail, Rick felt a familiar pressure in his chest. The same one he'd felt on the nights he believed they were right on the edge of something. For the first time in years, the island didn't feel dormant or silent or stubborn. It felt active, like something beneath the mud, water, and stone had finally heard the right person arrive. The promise that had haunted generations, the whispered $300 million treasure, the whispered secret vault, suddenly didn't feel like a legend. It felt close, too close. Emma knelt near the swamp's center, pressed her gloved fingers into the damp soil, and nodded to herself as if confirming a private suspicion. Then she motioned the team over. The moment her equipment pinged, the shift was instant. A faint distortion appeared beneath the eye of the swamp. Subtle, almost ghost-like, but undeniably there. Rick frowned. He'd seen false signals, anomalies, sonar glitches, but this was something different, something deeper. Emma adjusted the frequency, and a sharper image formed. The ground density didn't match natural swamp compression. It didn't match natural sediment layers. It didn't match anything that should exist under a naturally formed wetland. Instead, it aligned with the signature of a deliberately compacted chamber, soil pressed, layered, and engineered centuries ago. Rick's breath hitched, and before anyone could speak, Emma swept the sonar across the zone again. That's when the screen lit up with the shape that froze everyone. Perfectly straight edges, symmetrical corners, a void that didn't taper or twist like a cave or erosion pocket. This was geometry, precise, controlled, intentional. Emma's voice tightened, almost whispering, "This isn't natural. Someone built this." The team exchanged looks. Not wild excitement, not disbelief, something heavier, because in all the years of searching, all the false starts, all the hopeful surveys that led to nowhere, nothing had ever looked this clean, this deliberate. It wasn't a hint. It wasn't a possibility. It was a design. Rick stepped closer to the screen, jaw tensed, hands shaking slightly. They weren't looking at some random anomaly. They were staring at a blueprint, a vault outline, the kind of artificial chamber you didn't build unless you were hiding something so valuable, so dangerous, or so world-changing that you needed to protect it from generations of searchers. Emma's eyes gleamed with a mixture of adrenaline and absolute certainty. "This is the heart of the island," she said. Not a hypothesis, not a maybe, a statement, but she wasn't done. She started pulling up archived Templar schematics on her tablet, storage diagrams from the 1300s, architectural layouts of subterranean vaults, collapsible chamber systems, diversion tunnels. Then she overlaid the Oak Island swamp scans on top of them. The shapes matched, the angles matched. Even the void measurements were close enough that Rick couldn't form a single doubt. She explained how medieval Templar vaults often use false sediment layers to disguise their entrances, especially when hiding treasure in foreign territories. They constructed compacted chambers under wet ground because the waterlogged environment preserved timber, slowed decay, and discouraged unauthorized excavation. Rick suddenly remembered a story his father told him, a strange, half-drunken tale passed down through their family. Something about an underground nest beneath the swamp, a place where the old treasure hunters believed something important had been hidden. He had always assumed it was folklore, an embellished old legend designed to scare kids. But standing here, in front of Emma's data, he realized those whispers might have been the closest thing to truth they'd ever had. Emma kept going, pulling up the Nova Scotia Templar route map, the one historians always insisted held inaccuracies. She pointed to a missing marker near Oak Island, a marker that had long been dismissed as a cartographer's error. But when she aligned that missing symbol with her new coordinate, everything snapped into perfect formation. The tunnel angle, the chamber position, the swamp location, every piece fell into a design that had been overlooked for centuries. And then she dropped the part that shifted the entire atmosphere around them. "This chamber wasn't just for gold," she said. "This was a repository, a seal, a place to protect documents, possibly even artifacts, that were never meant to be found unless someone understood the code." Rick stared at her. If she was right, they weren't just standing above a $300 million treasure. They were standing above a vault that could rewrite the history of North America. A vault designed with intent, built with precision, and hidden under a swamp that was never meant to be uncovered by ordinary hands. For the first time since Rick Lagina set foot on Oak Island decades ago, the treasure didn't feel mythical. It felt measurable, traceable, real. Without a word, Emma moved to the map table and spread a transparent overlay across the scans. Rick leaned in as the lines formed circles, arcs, and angles, astronomical, not structural. She tapped the center, and the digital render shifted, highlighting the star field as it would have appeared in 1347. Instantly, the swamp coordinate they had just probed snapped into alignment with an invisible axis stretching northward. Rotating the projection, she hovered Polaris directly above the swamp's center. The coordinate wasn't random. It mirrored the pole star with mathematical precision. Emma explained that early Templar vaults weren't just hidden with surface markers. Their entrances, tunnels, and secondary chambers were encoded in celestial geometry. Without knowing the correct star year, explorers were always searching in the wrong place. She ran a timeline overlay, shifting the sky's rotation forward through centuries. Rick watched the alignment drift off, the star path slowly breaking away from the swamp coordinate. "Every single dig on this island," Emma said, "used modern star maps, not historical ones. They were all misaligned by just a few meters. A few meters, just enough to doom every attempt, to make every tunnel collapse appear like bad luck. Every flood tunnel activation seemed random." When she clicked back to the 1300s alignment, the star path locked perfectly into place, creating a triangular geometry that pointed to a single apex, Emma's exact spot. Rick didn't even try to speak. The realization hit him like a tidal surge. She had undone centuries of misinterpretation, thousands of hours of labor, mountains of money, and the heartbreak of dozens of treasure hunters all in one night. The map, the swamp, the vault, they hadn't changed. But the lens through which history viewed them finally had. Before the team could fully process the revelation, they moved to the swamp with the new coordinate marked. The first probe broke the water's surface and sank into mud that felt thicker than usual, almost resistant. As it pressed deeper, bubbles rose from the depths in slow, deliberate bursts. The swamp wasn't reacting like an organic body of mud and water. It was reacting like something sealed. Marty crouched near the edge, watching the bubble patterns. "This feels like pressure equalizing," he said. "Like we just punctured a chamber that's been locked for centuries." The bubbles weren't random. They came in pulses as though a closed space below them was breathing out trapped air. Emma didn't flinch. She simply noted the reaction and said this was exactly what she expected. Templar engineers, she explained, were masters of hydraulic deception. They designed swamp layers to disguise vault entrances, using water pressure to seal and preserve infrastructure. The reaction wasn't a warning, it was a confirmation. When the gas dissipated, a faint scent drifted up from below. Rick caught it first, ancient, earthy, woody. Not rotted wood, but preserved timber, the kind that only appears when old structural wood has been starved of oxygen for a very, very long time. He exchanged a look with Marty, and both men felt the same jolt. They weren't just probing mud anymore. They were touching the original builder's environment. The deeper the probe went, the more defined the feeling became. Layers of sediment gave way to something harder, possibly clay-packed retaining walls or collapsed ceiling beams. The swamp's surface tension shifted, creating subtle ripples that formed geometric patterns. It was as if the swamp wasn't a swamp at all, but a disguise draped over an architectural system. Emma watched the readings stabilize, her expression sharpening. Everything she had predicted from the celestial alignment was matching reality on the ground. The builders had used star geometry to place the vault, swamp engineering to hide it, and pressure dynamics to preserve it. And now all three were reacting simultaneously. She stepped back and opened a new window on her tablet. Seismic disruption data collected during the last set of deep tests. Normally, these scans produced chaotic, messy signatures because the island's geology was so fractured. But with the new alignment applied, the data suddenly organized itself, not into a chamber, but into something larger, something branching. Emma adjusted the filters, clearing noise from the lower frequencies, and slowly a long, sloping disturbance emerged beneath the chamber they'd already identified. Rick leaned in closer, his breath tight. This wasn't a pocket or a random cavity, it was linear, man-made in its consistency. Emma isolated it, overlaying angle measurements. The slope matched medieval Portuguese fort bunkers almost perfectly. She explained these bunkers often used angled tunnels with dual purposes, storage of valuables and emergency escape routes for whoever guarded the repository. Rick had seen hundreds of tunnel-like signals over the years that turned out to be silty cracks or water channels. But not this one. This one carried a resonant signature too smooth, too rhythmic. A tunnel. The team watched as she traced it deeper into the earth. The tunnel didn't end where typical voids signal off. Instead, it curved gently, following the exact geometry suggested by the Polaris alignment. And then the part that made everyone's skin prickle. 40 feet beyond the main chamber, a secondary echo appeared, a rectangular void with edges that held a stiffer return than wood or clay. Stone. Emma froze the feed. The scan wasn't showing collapsed brick or rubble. The angles were sharp, crisp. She zoomed in as far as the data allowed, and the outline clarified into something unmistakable. A stone door, still intact, untouched by water infiltration. Rick felt the back of his neck go cold. He'd dreamed of tunnels under Oak Island his whole life, but none had ever been proven. None had ever offered the structural certainty of this. "This is the most defined tunnel we've ever seen," he whispered, barely able to believe the words coming out of his mouth. Marty didn't argue. He couldn't. The evidence was too clean. Emma stepped closer to the projected map, her voice steady. "This system wasn't built just to hide treasure," she said. "It was built to protect people, or allow them to escape if the vault was compromised. A dual-purpose engineering design, rare, complex, and almost never found intact, especially after 7 centuries of weather, flooding, and human interference. Yet here it was, still holding its shape beneath the swamp, still guarding whatever the Templars locked inside. With the tunnel fully mapped and the star alignment verified, Emma directed the team to run a deeper seismic sweep along the precise corridor. As the probe advanced, the returns sharpened, revealing a new cluster of readings at the far end of the vaulted chamber, an anomaly so dense the software lagged for half a second before stabilizing. It wasn't the grainy, inconsistent echo of timber. It wasn't the smooth uniformity of stone. This was jagged, layered, uneven, and heavy, something metallic, but not a single object. Emma zoomed in as the density map shifted into a spectrum of reds and blacks, the telltale colors of extremely high mass. The signal formed overlapping contours, almost like plates pressed together, or bars collapsed into each other under centuries of pressure. Marty leaned over her shoulder, eyes widening as he recognized the frequency pattern. He'd seen it in archaeological studies of European hoards unearthed in Spain, vaults where gold ingots, chalices, and ceremonial relics had fused together after hundreds of years underground. The signature was nearly identical. Emma expanded the mass field and ran a weight calculation. The software flickered through its estimates, factoring density, volume, depth, and resistance. The number that appeared made her inhale sharply. Just under 4,000 pounds. Rick blinked, stunned. 4,000 pounds of metallic material, buried inside a chamber engineered for stability, protected by star alignment, sealed under a pressure-controlled swamp. Emma recalibrated, verifying the mass again. The number didn't budge. The only things that could create a signature this intense were stacked metallic artifacts, or a concentrated hoard of gold. At current valuation, even a fraction of that weight would push well into the $300 million range. And if the objects weren't simple bars but ornate Templar reliquaries or ceremonial treasure, the real value could be far higher. The chamber wasn't just hiding wealth, it was hiding intention. Rick stepped back slowly, unable to process the crushing reality settling over him. For decades, he had dug, sifted, drilled, scanned, theorized, and prayed that he might stand within arm's reach of proof. And yet somehow, despite all the years of progress, the swamp, this place they'd walked through, studied, drained, questioned, dismissed, and revisited, had guarded its secret inches beyond their reach. He remembered the early days on the island, when he was still young enough to think the treasure might speak to them in some mystical way. His father once told him the treasure wasn't merely hidden, it wanted to be found by the right person. As he watched Emma stand over the scan, aligning star charts and seismic lines with the calm certainty of someone solving a coded message, Rick realized something he'd never dared to consider. Maybe the island had simply been waiting for her. Everything, every misdirection, every failed dig, every collapse, had pushed the search away from the money pit and toward this moment. For the first time, Rick wasn't looking at an island resisting him. He was looking at an island responding to the right mind. Emma cross-referenced the mass with the tunnel slope again, tightening her calculations. The data behaved for her, like a mechanism unlocking, because the correct sequence had finally been entered. The weight of decades pressed on Rick's shoulders so heavily he had to steady himself against the equipment table. He stared at Emma, voice barely above a whisper. "You might have solved the island." Emma didn't answer. She was already pulling up structural overlays from the last 200 years of excavation theory. The diagrams of the money pit, the flood tunnels, the cribbing collapses, the mythical layers of logs. She sliced each one apart digitally, then overlaid them on the swamp's new scans. What emerged wasn't a contradiction, it was a correction. For generations, treasure hunters assumed the money pit was the epicenter, but Emma pointed out flaw after flaw, the inconsistencies in early accounts, the impossibility of certain engineering feats attributed to the builders, the fact that no medieval engineer would create a vertical entry for a priceless repository. The money pit wasn't a vault. It wasn't even designed to hold anything. It was a lure. She brought up evidence showing that the pit's construction mirrored known Templar misdirection strategies. False shafts meant to collapse, flood, or mislead intruders. The goal wasn't to hide the treasure underground. The goal was to drag attention away from the actual vault, which was positioned laterally, accessible through the swamp's hidden chamber. The infamous flood tunnels, which had stumped treasure hunters for centuries, suddenly made sense. They weren't random. They were alarms, hydraulic traps engineered to activate when pressure changed near the money pit, ensuring anyone who tried digging there would drown long before reaching the true vault. Marty exhaled sharply as the realization clicked into place. Every engineering trick, every collapse, every maddening setback, they weren't failures. They were deliberate protections designed by a culture famous for hiding secrets behind layers of intentional confusion. The island wasn't a chaotic puzzle. It was a strategy, a brilliantly orchestrated one. Emma highlighted how even the earliest searchers in the 1700s inadvertently triggered the island's defense system by digging in the wrong location. From that moment onward, every subsequent explorer had followed the same flawed assumption that the pit was the heart. But now, with celestial geometry, seismic mapping, and structural decoding laid bare, the truth looked almost painfully obvious. The vault was never beneath the pit. It was always meant to be approached sideways, through the star-aligned swamp chamber, down the sloped tunnel, and into the stone-doored vault where the metallic mass waited untouched. The map transformed in front of them, not a chaos of conflicting theories, but a single coherent design. A deliberate sequence of alignment, misdirection, and preservation engineered by people who anticipated intruders centuries ahead of time. The chamber, the tunnel, the stone door, the metallic hoard, they weren't fragments of unrelated clues. They were the product of a unified architectural plan, executed with precision and hidden with intent. The island's story shifted in an instant. It was no longer a landscape of confusion and speculation. It was the execution of a grand strategy, one that Emma Culligan had just decoded piece by piece. Satisfied that the digital model perfectly aligned with the ground scans, Emma led the team toward the swamp, her eyes scanning for anything that might confirm the map in reality. As they moved, a thin layer of muck peeled away under her glove, revealing a sharply carved stone triangle, its edges unnaturally perfect, its symmetry too precise to be accidental. Rick nearly dropped to his knees. The shape was unmistakable. The same geometric language as Nolan's cross. The same mathematical vocabulary carved into Oak Island's bones. Only this triangle was pointed like an arrow, aimed straight toward the anomaly Emma had detected, a marker that waited centuries for someone who could actually read it. Marty traced the angle with a laser level, and the beam shot across the swamp toward the exact coordinates Emma had calculated. The alignment matched the 1347 celestial path she had mapped, where the North Star sat during the final years of the Templar dispersal. Their breaths caught, not because it was a coincidence, but because it wasn't. The geometry, the star path, the Templar-era precision, it all fit together with a clarity that felt almost scripted. Rick murmured that this was the marker every previous search team had walked over without realizing its significance. Now, uncovered and undeniable, it completed the connection between map, ground, and vault, a physical confirmation of everything Emma had just decoded. The winch creaks as the probe lowers into the narrow opening Emma triangulated. For the first time all season, nobody speaks, not even Jack. The metal rod drops through soft peat, then silt, then thick clay, then thunk, a hollow, structured sound, the unmistakable knock of crafted wood. Emma's pulse spikes. She brushes dirt from the monitor and identifies the timber by density signature. Medieval oak, waterlogged, heavy, and resilient. The same material documented in Templar storage chests. They lower a second probe, and the sound this time is different. A crisp metallic ring that travels up the cable like a whisper from below. Everyone freezes. It's not random debris. It's not a rock. It's something forged, something valuable. She marks the depth, 27.4 feet, exactly the number her model predicted days before they even began scanning. Rick stares at her, unable to hide the tremor in his hands. They're not guessing anymore. They're following instructions written 7 centuries ago by people who expected this vault to be found long after they were gone. As Emma runs the final equations, the data stabilizes into a single overwhelming truth. The mass readings match high-density, non-ferrous metal. The shapes show stacked rectangular clusters. The resonance values are identical to tested gold bullion signatures. The vault's stone lining appears intact, meaning nothing has shifted, nothing has collapsed, nothing has leaked. It is sealed exactly as it was built. She turns to the team and says it clearly, without drama, without hesitation. This is the highest probability treasure vault ever identified on Oak Island. Rick's face collapses, not in fear, but in awe. Decades of searching, decades of dead ends, decades of pain and persistence. And now Emma has given him the closest thing to an answer anyone has ever had. He steps forward as she places a simple red flag into the mud. No ceremony, no speech, just a marker above the coordinates her system has verified beyond doubt. The sun dips low over the swamp, throwing long golden reflections across the water, as if the island itself is acknowledging what has just happened. 300 years of legend, misdirection, sacrifice, and obsession, all converging on a single point Emma Culligan has finally illuminated. The spot where the story might end, or where the greatest chapter is about to begin.